Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 2nd of August 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen for 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
The front pages of the red tops, at least today, Patrick, have been spectacular. Here we go. The Daily Mirror, Brits 118 Fahrenheit holiday hell. And the Daily Star saying, this heat will kill you. What can we say about that?
Yeah, it's just climate chaos, but that was the theme for the last couple of weeks, Mike, with this epic heat wave that's hit Britain, the best summer really on record for I don't know how many decades.
But they're bombarding us with these headlines on the days. The last couple of days have been quite normal temperatures and mostly cloudy, actually.
Yeah, so I don't know quite what to believe with that, Mike. We had the record-breaking hot day last week when we all had to wear jumpers down here, so I couldn't really figure out what the papers were talking about there. But anyway, I think the general theme here is to sort of be afraid of the weather, fear the climate. So again, this ties into climate change nicely. So I don't know, do you have the...
I have this one, yes.
Okay.
The 31 billion, this is the Express's take on it. Well, 31 billion heatwave boost to the economy.
It's amazing. So we're told that the heat's going to kill us, but then there's an economic windfall apparently from this heat wave, a 31 billion pound boost to the economy. I mean, can we have a little bit of that 31 billion, please? How do you get it? I guess if you just sit outside in the sun, that somehow the trickle-down effect will sort of take effect, and you'll get rich somehow. But you know, where does this $31 billion figure come from, Mike?
Well, £1 billion. I mean, dollars are worthless compared to pounds.
So where does this figure come from? Is it the petrol that people put in their tanks in order to go to the beach? Is it suntan lotion sales? Is it beach balls, parasol umbrellas? What exactly, where does this money manifest from? Where does this fortune, this financial windfall for the country, exactly how do they come to that figure, Mike? I'm still trying to figure it out. I want a piece of that sunshine, actually.
But the bottom line here is that the mainstream press this morning doing a spectacular job to sort of reinstate their credibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, let's move on to United Utilities. Now, the northwest of England, of course, has had some of the hottest weather in this massive heat wave. And as a result, the water has been disappearing out of the reservoirs, and United Utilities had declared that they would be putting in place a hosepipe ban, which is due to begin in the next day or two. Now, the problem for them was that in the meantime, the government gave permission for Quadrilla to start fracking in the northwest of England. And of course, that uses huge quantities of water. And so Ian Crane, in his live reports each morning on Facebook and YouTube, and also on his Fracking Nightmare program, which the last one he did was a couple of Thursdays ago, was making the point that this was a bit ironic, that the government had given permission for the frack to go ahead right at the moment that United Utilities was putting in place this hosepipe ban. Well, you'll be delighted to know, Patrick, that United Utilities has called off the hosepipe ban following this decision by the government. Now, of course, the mainstream media are not making any suggestion that there's a connection between these two events. That's me that's doing that, because I'm certainly suggesting that there's a connection between these two events. So the temporary ban by United Utilities was due to start on Sunday, actually, to safeguard essential supplies. But apparently recent rainfall and cooler temperatures and reduction of water usage have led to it being lifted. Are you aware of the types of rainfall taking place that were necessary to refill reservoirs?
I don't know. When did that happen? Did that happen between Friday and Sunday?
Must have, yes.
I think the main point here, Mike, is there's two sets of rules. There's one set of rules for polluting corporations, and there's another set of rules for the hapless public who just don't know any better. So in terms of water conservation, that looks like that's the double standard in effect.
Yes, absolutely. Well, look, let's move on to more serious issues. And we mentioned this yesterday. Corbyn apologises. This is the Guardian's take on it. Corbyn apologises over an event where Israel was compared to Nazis. Now, this was an event which took place in 2010, and in my opinion, he rather foolishly has apologised for taking part in that event because what was being highlighted was that a survivor from the Auschwitz death camps had been drawing parallels to what happened then and what is happening now with regard to Israel and Palestine. Pat, he, I think, as I say, rather naive isn't the right word, but it wasn't sensible of him to apologise for that. I think he should be taking a stand.
I'm not surprised, though, because it's one capitulation after another for Jeremy Corbyn on this fake, contrived anti-Semitism in the Labour Party campaign that's been waged against him. And as you rightly pointed out, Dr. Hayo Meyer, who spoke at that event, himself, Mike, was a Holocaust survivor. And now Corbyn, years later, is being attacked for sharing a platform with him. But what's really interesting is what you're going to show us right here, which is that today, again, you can see the mainstream media working all the various angles of this story. They all seem to be playing on the same team, Mike. So Jeremy Corbyn silenced Holocaust survivor and had Jewish protesters thrown out of an anti-Israeli meeting. And this is Reuben Katz, another Holocaust survivor who hates Corbyn apparently for something that may or may not have happened many years ago. And the accusation is that this event had an anti-Semitic atmosphere. That's the words used in the Telegraph report. I can't help thinking, Mike, that there's some war room somewhere where there are like teams of people working various press releases, and they all seem to be drifting out into the mainstream media, all synchronized, and it's relentless. I think this campaign is going to be going really until the Labour Party conference or until maybe this general election, a snap election called in the fall.
Well, look, this is a really important point that you make, this idea of a war room where journalists from various publications all coming together to discuss. Now, it's only a week or two since the revelation of the secret Facebook group where exactly that was going on. Go ahead.
Well, there's that possibility. There's also the possibility that the war room is not necessarily with journalists, but with PR people or people from the various Israeli lobby organizations or people with links to Conservative Party head office, because we've already established the link between the Conservative Central Office and Central Planning and the Israeli lobby, so in previous programs that you've done. So that, whatever this war room is, Mike, or war rooms, plural, it seems to be very, very efficient and completely relentless. And this leads us to, I don't know, well, we'll talk about, I don't know if you have the Al Jazeera
We'll come on to that in a second, but I just want to show another example of exactly this type of thing, because here's Sonia Mota tweeting this out today. This is insane. The BBC first do anti-Semitism smears against Jeremy Corbyn, and right after, on the same news programme, they broadcast Tommy Robinson, a far-right nationalist and Islamophobe, portraying him as some kind of freedom fighter, folk hero with great public support. And immediately afterwards, she says, unbelievable, Sky News, like the BBC, they're doing exactly the same thing. Exactly. So again, do we have a war room situation going on here?
Those are identical lineups by the BBC and Sky. And if you want to go to Sonia Mota's Twitter account, you can see the video footage for both of those clips, Mike. So the Sky and the BBC are mirroring exactly, not just the same talking points, Mike, but actually mirroring the design or breakdown of the segment. So basically pushing Tommy Robinson up with Jeremy Corbyn's anti-Semitism in the Labour Party story. So putting those two together, what would be the sort of subliminal message that the public would get by the juxtaposition of those two stories? I don't think it takes a genius to figure it out.
No, absolutely not. And as you mentioned this Al Jazeera story. Now, this is from January 2017. This video clip from Al Jazeera, exclusive Israel's parliamentary plot against UK politicians. And they were saying that the members of the Israel lobby in Britain, £1 million plot by the Israeli government to undermine Jeremy Corbyn. And they were looking at recruiting pro-Israel interests in the UK political scene to try to undermine politicians who had an anti-Israeli stance. Well, you know, we might say that it's Al Jazeera, another mainstream media organization, Al Jazeera, a mainstream media organization that has quite a number of BBC employees working for it. And the question is, why would they put something like this out?
Well, I'll be the first to criticize Al Jazeera's coverage. It's been absolutely abysmal with regards to Syria, and that has a lot to do with the Qatari government's backing of terrorists in Syria, over-the-table backing of terrorists in Syria, and their coverage has been abysmal on Libya as well. However, on the issue of Palestine, for whatever reason, be it the political stance of the royal family in Qatar or whatever, the coverage on Palestine has been favorable in favor of the Palestinians consistently since the beginning of the network, and very, I would say, critical of Israel on so many different documentaries and news reports. So, Mike, I don't see a reason why we would look at this report by Al Jazeera from 2017 and think that is anything other than what it's presenting, which is a bona fide scandal. The question is, if it's a bona fide scandal, Mike, how can the press or the mainstream media not put two and two together? Someone's put up $1 million to take down Jeremy Corbyn from a consortium of Israeli lobby groups or Israeli organizations, and somehow you can't connect that to this current fake anti-Semitism in the Labour Party trope, this canard that seems to be dominating the newspapers, the broadcast media, totally defamatory, totally sensational on every level, and used to sort of drive a wedge in the middle of the Labour Party to make it a non-viable opposition in the run-up to any snap general election. Mike, how can you not put two and two together? That's the question. So is the media itself, the mainstream media in Britain, are they in on this campaign, as it were? If there's any coordination, Mike, between any lobby groups, anybody in politics, and anyone in media, that, by definition, is a conspiracy.
Absolutely.
So call it what you want, but that's what it looks like.
So let's bring Robert Peston on, of course, former BBC himself. Can't remember who he's working for now, ITV or something. But anyway, he was tweeting this out this morning. We've got an official opposition tearing itself apart over anti-Semitism. Wrong, Robert, because it's not tearing itself apart. It's being torn apart by external influences. We've got the founder of the EDL running rings around the judiciary. Wrong. Tommy Robinson isn't running rings around anybody. There's Israeli lobby, pro-Zionist Middle East Forum from the United States running rings around the judiciary on Tommy Robinson's behalf. That's a very key distinction. And a government negotiating a Brexit plan that its own MPs and ministers tell me is dead. Wrong. That Brexit plan was dead from the very beginning. So it's pretty incredible that somebody who considers himself, from his Twitter page there, to be richly brilliant is so wrong on so many issues, Patrick.
So this is a classic mainstream media psyop. So Robert Peston is meant to be a political pundit. He's meant to be, or portrayed by his broadcast network, as someone who's in the know about all things politics. And right there, he is absolutely trying to manipulate the opinion of his followers. I don't know how many followers he has on Twitter or how many people actually watch his program. But you know, let's say in mainstream circles, he's influential. Total manipulation of the narrative and trying to weave in all of these different things, which the media recurrently love. And this is what arouses the media on a recurrent basis, is a crisis. So this is a good example of the media taking three different things that are relatively unrelated, mischaracterizing each of them, and then creating a crisis. And a crisis, of course, according to the media, needs a reaction. Something needs to be done. But he's not mentioning anything really significant or important in terms of the business of the nation, like the illegal wars that this government is participating in, whether that be in Syria, whether that be in Yemen, or any other places around the world, and burning through public funds in order to what? I don't know exactly. But so is Peston going to challenge the state on any really big issues? That's the question, and the answer seems to be
no.
No.
But Jeremy Hunt, silly man, currently our Foreign Secretary, running around Europe at the moment, telling everybody that a no-deal Brexit would be, all the other European leaders, he's doing this, that a no-deal Brexit would be a disaster. In fact, the only person who would be rejoicing would be Vladimir Putin. So there you go. That's all I'm going to say about Jeremy Hunt. Some people...
Sure. It's all about Putin, and all roads lead to Vladimir Putin. So a lack of imaginative thinking on the part of the Minister Hunt.
But let's come back to the BBC because The Guardian reporting that BBC's Today programme, now just to remind everybody, the Today programme is Radio 4, it's supposed to be a Radio 4 news and current affairs programme. It's been running for decades. It is supposed to be the flagship BBC morning news programme, begins at 6 a.m. and sets the news agenda for not just the BBC, because so many other mainstream media organisations take their steer from what takes place on the BBC Today programme, or that's how it has been in the past. Because the Guardian headline here says BBC Today programme sheds 800,000 listeners. And the question is, why has it shed 800,000 listeners? And the answer, Patrick, is because about a year ago they put a new editorial team in place, and they have dumbed this programme down to a degree that nobody can really get to grips with, and so it is hemorrhaging support.
It's not surprising, Mike. When you listen to Radio 4, it's amazing. They'll be doing some hard current event commentary, and then all of a sudden, this is on drive time, they'll pivot immediately into the mating habits of kestrels in the autumn, or sort of the benefits of underwater basket weaving or something like this in terms of depression therapy. But that's basically a Radio 4 lineup there. So whenever there's something important going on, I always tune in, but I never get back what I'm looking for, which is commentary on what's really important to the public. So maybe that's why they're hemorrhaging so badly.
And BBC Newsnight, which of course is the evening news programme of anybody that has an IQ higher than 40, goes to that one rather than the main BBC News. I mean, if you're that way inclined at all. But BBC accused of breaching code by putting Assange critic in charge of special on Wikileaks founder. This is RT reporting this. And what they're saying is BBC Newsnight will air a special on Wikileaks founder Julian Assange, hosted by journalist John Sweeney, despite what the Free Assange campaign say are tweets in clear breach of the BBC's objectivity standard by the journalist. So they're saying that John Sweeney put in charge of tomorrow's special despite malicious tweets in clear breach of BBC code. And what kind of language is he using? This journalist, he's calling Assange a Russian agent, a Kremlin asset, a useful idiot, this type of language. And so the campaign, the Free Assange campaign, saying that they've been challenging him on this and calling him a UK state TV propagandist, and he in response has accused them of twaddle. So there you go. The BBC can't get it right in the mornings, don't seem to get it right in the evenings. And is it any wonder that, what was the statistic? 16% of people now trust the BBC. They should be embarrassed of themselves.
What's more embarrassing, Mike, is the fact that BBC didn't sack Sweeney for making those comments, because wouldn't comments like that made publicly really sort of bring down or degrade your position as a perceived anyway as a journalist? I know that's an elastic term with the BBC, but so the question is, why didn't they sack John Sweeney? And the reason is because the BBC is absolutely on board with the campaign of defamation against Julian Assange, who himself is a journalist, who himself is a publisher. So again, you can separate what the cause that Julian Assange is being persecuted for or is fighting for, and all the millions of supporters are backing him on, is a completely different industry or enterprise that the BBC is involved in. And the BBC technically is a state-run propaganda oracle, which is completely different. I mean, the total diametric opposite end of the spectrum of where WikiLeaks are or where any other alternative or independent media outlet is. So that's really, there's a political agenda there. John Sweeney imbues that, and therefore he's rewarded by the BBC for that. If this isn't a perfect case study, Mike, of that, I don't know what is.
Well, Patrick, as we know, alongside this issue of the collapse, the continuing collapse of the mainstream media because they're not doing their jobs, because of that, of course, government getting pretty upset about social media, and of course, while the government is getting upset about social media, in parallel with that, the public is getting upset with social media because of the data collection, the fact that they're effectively running a monopoly and so on. But what the public don't seem to appreciate is that actually these concerns about data protection and monopoly are being stoked up by the government. Now, the government is approaching the problem of social media in two ways. First of all, and let's just remind ourselves who we're talking about. Facebook, Twitter, and Google are the main three. And the government approaching this problem in two ways. They're approaching it directly with these companies and requiring them to put in processes and programs in place, mostly driven by AI, to try to deal with pages and accounts that are putting out a narrative that the government doesn't like, having those pages and accounts shut down. But the other approach that they're taking is a slightly more aggressive approach with regard to competition. And so they have brought on board a former chief economic advisor. This is Professor Jason Furman. He was chief economic advisor to Barack Obama. He's a Harvard professor. And they've brought him on board to lead a government expert panel to look at how to guarantee tech market support for competition in these areas. So basically they're looking at how they can bring new players into the market, bring some competition against the big three, and potentially break up the big three perhaps. Now, the issue with this is this, Patrick, as I see it. As much as I agree with everybody that wants to criticize, for example, Facebook for its pretty reprehensible behavior in terms of data collection and so on, the fact of the matter is that the ability to get a story out has been facilitated by Facebook that was in a way that was impossible before on the internet. So on the internet in the past, we had people that set up discussion groups, and there were interest websites on particular issues and whatnot. And there was pretty much very limited cross-pollination in ideas between these various groups. So everything was siloed, to use the common purpose term. They like to use this term, but everything was siloed. And so somebody that was talking about issue A probably wasn't too interested in issue B and didn't get any idea of what people were talking about with regard to issue B. And this situation has been resolved by Facebook in a sense, because people posting on Facebook, that information is being shared in a way that we haven't seen before. And what government is attempting to do here is to bring back the siloed internet that they had before, because they could control the narrative much better under those circumstances. And that's part of what this is about. So I think when we have this discussion about Facebook's behavior with regard to data collection, and the fact that that data collection perhaps is feeding into intelligence services and so on, we've got to look at this, the broader picture here, and see actually what advantages the likes of Facebook and Twitter bring us as well. And that should be informing a better discussion on this issue.
Well, clearly, Mike, the concern of the state, the concern of the establishment is the viral potential of any piece of information or any viewpoint or any news article online. This is the big fear from the establishment. The irony here, Mike, is the government is hijacking an existing public discontent. What is the public, and what is, the user base, or the active users of social media, what is the real core of the discontent? It's over censorship. It's over shadow banning. The government has come in, hijacked that narrative in order to regulate under other premises, justifications, fight data and privacy violations and so forth, and not addressing the actual issue of censorship. In fact, regulating to allow for more censorship. In fact, even threatening the social media companies that if they're not censoring what's deemed to be fake news, then they're going to be fined or perhaps shut down in various markets. And of course, as we discussed on the Sunday Wire on Sunday with our guest, Renan Santos from Brazil, that's Facebook really wanting lobbying, complying with any government request in any country, no matter if it's run by an authoritarian right-wing government or a left-wing government or a progressive coalition like in America. Well, not in the White House, but I'm talking about sort of generally in the Silicon Valley. It's definitely Democrat Party oriented. It doesn't matter internationally. Facebook, their only obligation, their only moral obligation, they don't have any moral obligations. Their only obligation is to their shareholders, for the performance of their shareholders on the stock market. And that's why Facebook has created all these billionaires like Mark Zuckerberg and all these employee millionaires, shareholders. They've made their money now, okay? The reason they've been allowed to make their money, this is a point I made which is important, they monetized the user engagement, the size of their IPO, the value of their company when they went on the stock market was really based on the potential of their user base, the earning potential of the size and the engagement level of their user base. They monetized that in the form of an IPO, made billionaires and millionaires left, right, and center. Now they've got their money, they're cashing in, and they're stabbing their user base in the back, saying, well, we're done with you now, we've made our billions, and to hell with this platform, and we'll let the government run roughshod over it. Whatever, we don't care, we'll comply as long as we can make our money or be active in this market or that market. It really comes down to that, Mike. I think it comes down to money at the end of the day, and greed, and all these values that these Silicon Valley companies purport to have, and trying to make the world a better place. And look at what they've created here, one fake crisis after another. And I'm going to say one last thing, Mike. Watching Mark Zuckerberg in front of Congress, before, during the congressional hearing, watching him cave into Congress and basically nod his head like a kid in the principal's office, and saying, nodding his head to Russian bots and Russia giving Donald Trump the White House and all this stuff. Mark Zuckerberg is smarter than that, but he went along with the gag, and that is a real betrayal, an absolute betrayal of everybody who the users built the Facebook platform. Okay, that's who really gave value to that platform. And he had plunged the knife into the back of everybody and run roughshod over free speech and allowing machine language, ML or AI or whatever you want to call it, to run censorship algorithms and to just make life an absolute misery for anybody that's really going about their normal daily business with the best intentions. That's the reality of what Zuckerberg and his inner circle have allowed by caving into the government. He's rich enough to buy off every single congressman and senator. It doesn't take much, by the way. I think most of them will get up on their desks and do pirouettes for about $5 grand. Mark Zuckerberg could buy Congress 10 times over. So what is he afraid of exactly at this point in his career? It's just mind-boggling, Mike.
Well, the irony, of course, is that the government has encouraged more and more internet use and still is absolutely determined to have everybody online because, of course, once they've dealt with this problem of fake news, there's going to be nobody to stand in the way of their own narrative. So Ofcom, of course, responsible for regulating the internet, amongst other things in this country, has published a new report here called A Decade of Digital Dependency, where they're saying, well, smartphones checked on average every 12 minutes, 20% of adults spending more time online each week than they spend at work, and so on. And really the suggestion is that that we are absolutely glued to our mobile phones, we're glued to the internet. I'm concerned about what the majority of people do while they're on the internet. They're not doing anything productive. Apparently 40% pick up their phone and start browsing the internet, checking their emails and so on within 5 minutes of waking up in the mornings. That's a bit depressing. I think it's probably even more depressing that they're still using them 5 minutes before they go to bed. But anyway, in the meantime, Behavioural Insights, we were talking about that on yesterday's programme, and the UK's Behavioural Insights team. Well, the Ministry of Defence and the Defence, the DSTL at Porton Down is now getting involved in a new programme on behavioural insights. They're calling it the new Behavioural Insights Analytics Competition Scoping Workshop, and it is part of the Defence and Security Accelerator. They are seeking innovative solutions to how the Ministry of Defence and partners across the defence and security can unlock the potential of understanding human behaviour from the estimated 2.5 quintillion bytes per day of user uploaded data using behavioural analytics. They're going to be holding a workshop on the 13th of September where stakeholders can help shape the scope of the new Behavioural Insights competition. So, Patrick, this looks like something which began in the Cabinet Office as far as the British government's concerned in the sort of civilian realm and is being used to try to manage people's perception of government policy and perhaps change their behaviour with regard to government policy. And as they've stated, making sure they do that in a way where people don't understand how the behaviour was changed with regard to that public policy. But now this is being potentially weaponised by the Ministry of Defence. that is a pretty dangerous direction for it to be taken in.
Yeah, sure it is, but you can make the argument going in the other direction, Mike, whereby the military has been pushing concepts of psychological operations and information warfare into the public sphere for years and years. That's absolutely happened. But I think what's really happening here, Mike, is a blurring between the boundaries between the public government sphere and the defense sphere. So they become one and the same. They become interchangeable at that point. And I think that's the big danger here, because the military usually have singular objectives, and they have goals and missions and so forth. And the government more and more is behaving like the military in this respect. So gone are the nuance, gone is any sort of stepping back and thinking about the utility or the ethics of what you're doing, and it's all about just achieving an objective. So I think more and more the government and the military are looking like they're operating in exactly the same fashion.
Yeah, this is a very good point, because this is a policy which is being drifted in via the European Union and NATO as well, involved in this. The idea that civilian policing, for example, and military policing should be a single operation, and I suspect we're going to see that more and more in other areas of policy as well.
And as the lines blur, Mike, also the military is infected with customer service, rebranding of names and reframing to more reflect what's going on the government third sector side. So again, it's going both ways, and I think that the line between the two is just fading more and more. It's degrading with every passing year.
Absolutely. Now, here's a Mirror article. What is Momo? Parents warned over sick WhatsApp suicide game that could be the next blue whale. And you're talking about the use of applied psychology in the sort of civilian realm. We've been talking about this at the UK column for quite some time. The promotion of suicide amongst children from 12, particularly from 12 to 16, 12 to 18. We're seeing it starting to migrate into the student populations, particularly Bristol University has been highlighted recently as having a significant problem with the number of students committing suicide. But we have this kind of thing being brought into mobile phones, brought onto mobile phones, and I know of teenage children in Plymouth that are talking about these types of applications where self-harm and suicide are being actively promoted within the auspices of the game. One of the things that we pointed out in the past was we picked a particular area of South Wales close to the suicide cluster in Bridgend, where we were seeing suicide being promoted through school plays and plays aimed at teenagers in South Wales, and we were showing the groups that were lottery funded in some cases that were being used to promote this narrative, and we were showing the results of it. So this, of course, taken to a new level once it gets on a mobile phone and effectively potentially goes viral. This article talking about a 12-year-old girl in Buenos Aires committing suicide linked to Momo. So this is truly a global initiative, taking this type of applied psychology and messing with children's minds. It's horrible.
This is a psyop. Look at this. This is the most reprehensible, disgusting thing you can imagine there. If that's being targeted and being aimed at children, then I think that you've got a serious problem going on there.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to migration and Italy, because, well, migrants coming to Italy from Libya, of course, being turned away at the moment, and the Italian government being accused of being in breach of international law by the fact that they would not bring these people into Italy, and in fact turned them away. So I'm not really going to say too much more about that, Patrick, other than to say, in all the mainstream media coverage of this story today, I didn't see a single mainstream article which drew any irony out of that statement. The accusation from the United Nations that Italy is in breach of international law for not accepting migrants, when nobody has criticised anybody for the wars which caused these the migrant crisis to happen in the first place, and the fact that which international laws were broken when Libya was bombed into the Stone Age, which allowed these routes to open up in the first place. Nobody's talking about that breach of international law, which is significantly more significant than Italy turning away one boatload of migrants.
Well, what it shows you, Mike, that international law actually does not apply to NATO. International law does not apply to the US, the UK, and France, as we learned in April with the tripartite strike against Syria, but we've learned that many other times in the past. And also, of course, international law doesn't actually apply to the State of Israel. So again, there's certain people that, well, they talk about enforcing it, and they'll certainly wave their finger at a smaller, a weaker state if they think they're in violation of it, but they themselves don't actually observe it. And of course, who's a more of a struggling economy in Europe right now, Mike, than Italy? So they're waving the finger in Italy, and the new government that's come in Italy as well, which is being characterized by a lot of the Northern European mainstream media as being a white nationalist-oriented government or a nationalist government. Therefore, they're roundly condemned, Mike. So, but you can blame this whole framing of the migrant crisis and the obfuscation of any NATO member state involvement in the takedown of Libya, the illegal takedown of Libya. Blame that on the BBC. Mainstream media propagandists have done such a great job of doing this over the last sort of 6 or 7 years.
Which in itself is breach of international law.
Yes, exactly. But it also leads, Mike, to the calls for militarized EU hard border force. And who's best to sort of carry out that duty? Well, there is something waiting in the wings, Mike, just all ready to go to perform that great humanitarian and security mission for Europe. And of course, you've learned that through the PESCO agreement. So again, I can see how it's progressing all nicely, this agenda.
Okay, well, you mentioned Israel. Let's talk about Tamimi.
Ahed Tamimi has been released a couple of days ago. This is the young, iconic resistance activist, Palestinian girl who was jailed. I think she was jailed when she was 13. I'm not sure, but I think she's definitely 14 now. I might have that wrong, but 14, maybe 15, I'm not sure. But she's been released. Stunning interview here by RT, which was put out, I think, this morning. And she says she would happily go back into jail 100 more times. And as we pointed out the other day, I think on Monday, Mike, that she's actually sad because there's a number of girls like her that are still languishing in Israel's little gulag that it runs, with thousands of Palestinians in there as young as in their young teens. And these are people that are basically identified, pointed out, and targeted by the IDF as potential, future political or resistance leaders, or people like, they've been doing this for years, basically. And anybody that they want to take off the streets and intimidate or throw in jail for a while, and who knows doing what with their head while they're in there, illegally incarcerated by this apartheid state. I can say that officially because Israel has just enshrined its apartheid status into Israeli law recently. So it is an apartheid state. It's actually much worse than an apartheid state, Mike, if you consider the military aggression carried out by the IDF against the Palestinian people. But so great interview. I encourage people to go look at it and also follow this young lady. She's absolutely extraordinary.
And more Israeli bad behavior as they once again are attacking Syria. Now they're claiming that they're attacking ISIS terrorists. I'm fascinated by this because, of course, in the past they've been supporting ISIS terrorists by giving them medical aid and so on. And as we reported on the UK column news yesterday, the Syrian army finding caches of Israeli supplied arms in southern Syria. So I wonder, Patrick, whether this is a targeted attack to try to make sure that certain aspects of the narrative never see the light of day.
Sure. It very could well be, Mike, that there's a pivot that's taking place. I mean, you have to take into consideration the recent meeting between Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin, and also the meeting between Benjamin Netanyahu and Vladimir Putin to sort of conclude that there's now some possibly agreement here in terms of how we're going to deal with the militants in Syria, who, let's face it, Israel has been backing for a number of years now, and who the U.S. as well has been indirectly backing in the northern parts of Syria as well. So, and other foreign actors as well have been backing these terrorists. So there could be, Mike, a pivot going on, a change in tact, maybe a realization that the so-called rebels and ISIS are not going to successfully overthrow the government of Bashar al-Assad and turn Syria into an Islamic State. That's not going to happen. Is the penny finally dropped and they're going to give up, or they've just decided to take a new strategy in terms of wearing Syria down long-term through an economic embargo and then through asymmetric, deploying asymmetric terrorist attacks, suicide bombs, etc., to try to create sectarian divisions throughout the country. This is the strategy that's been employed to destroy Iraq after the U.S. invasion over many years, and it seems to be very successful. It has destroyed the country and has created a situation, made it rife for, let's say, an ISIS incursion in 2014, but also a continued U.S. military presence in Iraq and a political presence as well, if you consider the Green Zone in Iraq. Are they trying to carve out a similar scenario going forward with Syria and, you know, destroy the country slowly economically and from within with repeated terrorist attacks and so forth, creating sectarian division? I would think that would be more of a long-term strategy for the U.S. and its allies at this point, because they've lost the military battle, as it were.
Okay, and I want to end with this article from the Times, which is headlined "Doctored Lungs for Pigs Could Cut Transplant Waiting Lists." And you may wonder what this has got to do with Syria, but we'll come on to this in 1 second. The article says that bioengineered lungs have been successfully transplanted into pigs in an advance that doctors hope will increase the number of organs available to humans. For the first time, a team of US scientists was able to grow a lung along with working blood vessels and then keep it breathing inside a pig. They said that they now hope to do the same with humans, in humans within 5 to 10 years, and to help reduce the long waiting times for people awaiting lung transplants. The technique will still rely on donors, though, although they're built in a laboratory. The lungs are not constructed from scratch. Instead, they require donated material. And this is what is caught my attention here, because while the Times doesn't discuss this in any detail, the question is, where does this donated material come from? You know, there is a waiting list for lung transplants, as there is for other forms of transplants as well. So you would imagine, or you have to ask the question, if lungs become available for transplant, they're going to go into somebody who has a need for that transplant, and they're not going to go to scientific research. So where is the material coming from for this scientific research? This is a very big question, and I have to say it's an area that we are looking into, and 21st Century Wire looking into as well, because we are aware that people are being taken from Syria and other war zones for organ harvesting. Well, this is a piece of work that we're doing, but I'm going to ask the question, are these people aware of what the provenance was from origin to the laboratory for where they got the material for this research? I think this is something that perhaps it would be helpful if the mainstream media got involved in that research as well, because they perhaps have got the resources to do that work.
Sure, and it doesn't end with the trafficking of organs and tissue from war zones, Mike. Those items are also being trafficked right here, right under our nose. And I think there's been these stories that have also been broken in America regarding Planned Parenthood last year with the Veritas Project. So this is a serious issue, Mike, but more than anything, this is big business, Mike. This is big business on the front end and then downstream as well. And you can see the downstream applications here lung transplants, and of course, who knows where that's going to lead. I don't know. I suppose even the tobacco industry might be happy about this latest development. So who knows?
Okay, well, we'll leave it there for today. Thank you very much for joining us, Patrick. Thank you for joining us. There will be no UK column news tomorrow. Apologies for that. Brian is at the Fresh Start Foundation talk in Orkney this weekend, and unfortunately, I'm unavailable tomorrow as well. So we're taking a day off. We'll be back on Monday, and we hope to see you then. Bye-bye.